Okay, thank you everybody for attending this iMoot16 Mini Moot session. We have Scott Huntley. Scott is a consultant and trainer currently working for Pukunui and has presented as a guest speaker at the Moodle Moot in Australia in 2015, 2016, and most recently at the Moodle Moot in New Zealand this year. Thank you very much, Scott, for presenting at the iMoot today. So Scott will be telling us all about using competency frameworks and learning plans. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. And hi, everybody. I guess for me, it's good afternoon, but for some of you, good morning, good evening. So today we're going to talk a little bit about competency frameworks and learning plans, which are new features in Moodle 3.1. But before we get there, just from my background, the reason why I'm interested in this is because, as Vinny just mentioned, I'm a trainer consultant for Pukunui technology, but up until a few months ago, I was actually a teacher at TAFE, which is a vocational sector education institute in Australia. And at TAFE, we actually would use a competency-based education system. So we were confined within the world of ASQA, which is the Australian Skills Quality Authority. And what ASQA does is they develop these, for the vet sector, they develop a set of competency frameworks. So almost a collection of skills that you have to prove you're competent in order to get a qualification. And the beautiful thing about ASQA here in Australia is that you can take those actual units of competency, or these the units, and transfer between programs. So if you were doing a diploma of information technology, for instance, and you had the unit in SQL, then you could actually go to another program where they required that unit, and you'd already be given a competent in that. So that's kind of the world that I was coming from. And in the past, our TAFE actually went through an ASQA audit. So an ASQA audit is where the regulators come in and they check to see if you're actually delivering content in an appropriate way. And we passed the audit, and some of the problems that, or areas of improvement they gave us at that time was that we had some problems with documenting the evidence to justify the outcomes we gave them. So if we just said, okay, yeah, we've proven this student is competent in, say, hardware, we didn't have enough evidence to indicate what made them competent. What's the difference between an incompetent or not yet competent mark and a competent mark? They also identified we had a few problems with feedback to students. Students didn't necessarily understand the actual system they were being graded in. And we had to better inform students every step of the learning and assessment cycle, how well they were doing. So one of the things that we implemented was the student assessment guide, and this is pretty typical for at least TAFE, at least in our institute. A student assessment guide was a way that we would say to the students, this is what you're going to be assessed on, and these are the ways that we are going to assess you. So there's going to be an exam at this date, there's going to be an assignment at this date, and so forth. And it became mandatory that we had to have every student sign off that they had actually received a student assessment guide, or a SAG as we came to call them. So the student assessment guide, the SAG, contains all the information required under the compliance standards. And it was very important that we actually had that documentation that said that the student had received it. So in the past, we'd actually given it the actual SAGs as paper copies, and we actually got the students to sign a checklist, which is one of the things that we realized, you know, why don't we actually try to implement this inside our LMS? Why don't we use this inside Moodle? And so we tried to experiment with some of the better ways to actually do this. So a lot of the ideas that came out of the audit, we actually went into this particular site that I have here on the screen. This was not our actual Moodle, our production Moodle. This was a development Moodle. And we actually built some courses inside there. So database proof of concept version 2. That was a course that I was working on with my supervisor at the time, Sharon. And it was a proof of concept course just for one of these ASCO units. And that particular ASCO unit, the code, it was this ridiculous number, ICT PRG 425, using structured query language. And if you're an IT person, you know that's all about SQL. So it's a database unit. You don't really need to know too much about the database. I'm not going to get into the actual specifics of that. So we actually built a little sample course. It was pretty ugly. I don't apologize for that. We tried to our best to, we didn't want to focus too much on that for the actual implementation of we were just testing our ideas in this course. So we weren't too worried about what it looked like, although I did take a little time to make some pictures for the grid format. And one of the things that I just mentioned, the student assessment guide, one of the ways that we actually accomplished this, or the way that we ended up accomplishing this across the standard was, across the board, was to use the choice activity. So we actually created a choice activity, and we asked the students, do you accept the SAG? And inside the description, we actually included all the SAGs that they had to download. Later, we were told we had to do this choice for each individual SAG. So if a cluster had 4 units, we had to do 4 SAGs, but it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. So the student would go into the choice, they'd download the PDF, and they would tick, yes, they accept the SAG. And one of the cool things about choice is typically we give people an option, a number of choices. By definition, a choice implies you can have more than one option. But the way that Moodle works, you can actually set up a choice so that there's only one thing to tick. So the students would go in, and it would be, do you accept the student assessment guide? And they would have the choice of yes, and that's it. And if they tick the yes, we could then tap into the activity completion, and we made it so that every other ability for them to interact with the course was restricted based upon whether they accepted the student assessment guide. If you actually go to the course that for this particular presentation, so if you go back up to the course level, there is actually a section there called do you want to be special? And it's the exact same thing. It's limited. The first 6 people that decide they want to be limited or they want to be special, go up, do the choice, and you'll get a badge. And I've limited it just to the first 6 people. So there you go. There's a little bit of a treasure hunt there. So before we get too far into the actual competency based education that the competency frameworks they put into Moodle 3.1, if I wanted to talk about competency itself, because we found one of the biggest problems was amongst ourselves as teachers, we all had sort of a slightly different idea of what it meant. So we went to the actual ASCWA definition. Now, I'm telling you that this is the ASCWA definition, so it's only applicable really for in Australia and only really inside the vet sector. So go back to your governing body and find out exactly what they mean by competency-based training and assessment. For us, competency-based training and assessment means that the person is trained and assessed to meet the performance and knowledge requirements to safely and effectively complete workplace activities in a range of different situations and environments to an industry standard that is expected in the workplace. In other words, can this person do this skill? Can they do it effectively? And can they do it safely? So remember, this is the vet sector, so safety is a big thing, especially considering that some of the other subjects that they teach are like, carpentry, plumbing, forklift driving, anything like that. So safety really does come into it as well. Competency-based training and assessment, we went back to the documentation, and we said that it is not to compare the training outcomes between learners. That means we are not to rank learners. We're not to say who's the best in the class. There is no ranking between the learners. It is simply, does this person do this task competently? And that's sometimes very hard because as teachers, we want to give people a mark between 0 and 100. At least that's what I wanted to do because that's the school system I came from. That's the school system I was educated in. And now we're at a system where it's not even pass-fail. It's, are you competent yet to do this skill? And that's simply what it meant for us. So we had to really sort of reevaluate, what does that mean for quizzes? What does that mean for tests? What's the pass mark? Is there such a thing as a pass mark anymore? it really made us actually go back to the core of the question of what makes people competent in a skill. And this also led to the question of one of the problems that we had as found out in the audit was that students themselves didn't understand the system because they were coming from a world where a pass is 50%. So a lot of times they would say something like, okay, well, I just have to get a 50% in this test. And we're like, no, you have to not only get a significant mark that proves that you're competent, and we would usually set that around 80. We also said that you have to get the questions correct that were relevant to the actual unit guide. So there might be 3 or 4 things that we're testing them on competency, and they might get an 80%, but that 4th thing, they got all those questions wrong. Well, that's not a pass because they did not adequately demonstrate competence in one of those performance criteria. We also had, so we often had students say, okay, well, what's the minimum mark do I have to get to pass? And it was very difficult. We couldn't tell them a minimum mark. We said, it's typically 80% across all these questions. And a lot of times we'd actually have students who did really well on one assessment, and then they decided not to pass in a second assessment because they said, I did brilliant on the first one, so I probably could get by without doing the second one. And that's where students would fail. And we had to educate our students what competency-based education meant. So I've been referring to ASQA, and what ASQA actually does is they produce documents like this one. And I know this is impossible to read on this one, but this is the actual unit guide for that use structured query language unit that I was talking about. So this is a unit, and inside that unit, they have elements and performance criteria for each element. And I know that you can't read that on this slide, but this particular one had 9 elements. And you can see that, I'll go back a second, each element made up of approximately 3 or 4 performance criteria. So if we just look at a sample one, the first element 1, write a simple SQL statement to retrieve and sort data. And that was made of 3 criteria. 1.1, retrieve all the data from a single table, retrieve the data from specific columns in a single table, use the order by to sort the query output. So that's what we actually started to say inside our system. We had to build those competencies in. And so I'm going to actually switch to my demo site and show you how we would actually build that in. I might not need to go back to the actual document to get those. I don't want to type that all out, but I'm going to switch here, share my screen, so we'll see how this works. This is the part where everything dies on me. Yes, open, please. And we're testing this. We're sharing this. There we go. We are now sharing my desktop. And let me just close this down here. Can somebody verify that they can see my screen? Oh, I can see my screen there. Yes, can you guys see the, can somebody just type? Yep, excellent, perfect, thank you. All right, so I'm going to switch over to, so this is my development Moodle. And usually things live and die here very quick. I just test things every now and then. So I built a course here this morning, the iMoot16 competencies. And what I'm actually going to do right now is start to build out that unit that I was talking about, the SQL unit, show you how I would build this into my course. So right now I've got a course, and it's just a pretty simple course. Really, like I said, this is my demo Moodle, so it's ugly. And all I have really is just one activity. They've got a assignment where here they have to upload something. Probably, I would guess it would be a text file of SQL statements if we were going to go into this, but it really doesn't matter. This is just for demo purposes. So underneath site administration, down here, this is Moodle 3.1, and they have a section here called competencies. So we're going to go into the competency settings. So the first thing we wanted to make sure, and I knew this was already enabled, but the first thing we want to do is make sure that we've enabled competencies and these competencies inside Moodle themselves. And we're going to push the course ratings to the individual learning plans. Yes, so we want to tick both of those options. We come down here into competency frameworks. And so I have an old one here that I had built, but I was going to build one from scratch today. I'm not going to build that entire 9 units or the 9 elements in the whatever performance criteria, but we'll just build those first 3. So I'm going to add a new competency framework. And I found what works best is for this top level one to give it a very generic name. So these all come from the ICT package. And if I wanted to, I could actually put in some information in there. The ID number, that's a little bit of a misnomer. It doesn't actually have to be a number. It has to be a code. So I'm going to use ICT. I'm just trying to think. Was it ICT 15? No, I don't think it actually has a year after it. In terms of the scale, this is going to be what we're actually going to use as our competency scale. So the default one, the one that's built into Moodle, if we go take a look at that, oh, that didn't show it there. The default competency one is this very similar to the ASCO one, not yet competent or competent. And we can actually go inside and actually include another scale if we wanted. So they actually have this one, the SNS, that's satisfactory, not satisfactory. That's a custom scale that I put into the system. And the separate and connected ways of knowing that comes from Moodle itself. So if you had another scale that you were using for your competencies, perhaps you had the satisfactory, not satisfactory credit distinction, you could actually build that scale and put that inside Moodle itself. This configure scales, this is where we're going to show, this you have to do. The default, students by default are not yet competent. And how do we mark if they're proficient? They're proficient if they have a competent. This is where I was talking about if we had another scale, and why don't I just close that for a second? If we actually tested this on the separate and connected ways of knowing, you can actually see we actually have a variety of ones here. So mostly separate knowing, say that's the default, and we determine separate and connected is proficient, and mostly connected knowing is proficient. So these are competent, and this is by default what a student has. I'm going to cancel that one, go back to my default, because I want this one here, default and proficient, close. This section here, taxonomies, this is not actually well documented in Moodle's documentation, so I've had a little bit of a play trying to figure out what it is. I think it's just that the documentation hasn't caught up to the actual product itself. So this is where we, instead of competency, maybe we're measuring them against behavior, or maybe we're measuring them against concept. And these are not changeable, they're built in, so we just have these systems inside here. But we could actually maybe measure people against a different set of criteria. I'm just going to leave them all as competent and competency, and there we go. Right, so we actually built that first level, so that's the top level, and inside there, that's where we can actually add sub-competencies. So the very first sub-competency we're going to add, and this is where cut and paste actually becomes my friend. So we're going to take this right out of here, and we're going to scroll down a bit. I'm going to actually take the unit guide, or the unit name, and we'll come back to here, and we'll say the name is that use structured query language. And I found it's easier to actually include the code in there as well. If we wanted to, we could put in a description. We could actually probably grab that from somewhere inside here. And so, boom. And the ID number, again, that's just has to be a code. It doesn't have to be a number. You do have to include one, though. So that's where I'd actually use the unit guide code. And we'll save that. And you can see this is the part where it becomes a little bit tedious because I have to save that one and then inside this. So this competency would be for that entire unit. But that entire unit is actually made up of sub-competencies. So inside here, I would add another competency. And I would actually go down here to the element, and I would say, this is my sub-competency. And I'm going to come back here. I'm going to skip the description, the ID number, ICT PRG 425.1, and we're going to still inherit the default framework. Yep, there we go. And then inside this one, we actually have 3 sub ones. Now, I'm just going to be lazy here because I know that we'd get very bored if I did all this. I'm just going to put in just one. So performance criteria element 1.1. I could put in a little bit of description. Again, I'm going to put in ICT PRG 425 element 1.1, and we'll save those changes. So if I, at the start of the year, this is going to be a little bit of a pain, but I would actually build out all those competencies from my unit guides. And again, I found just through practice, putting it in sort of like an upper level in the hierarchy makes it a little bit easier. I don't know necessarily why, but it's later on we'll find that we actually can't really apply competencies to the top level, or competent, not yet competent to the top level. We can only apply it to the sub ones. So that's how I build up my competencies, and that's all great and all, but I also need to build a learning plan. So this is going to say what a student actually has to learn during the course of studies with me in my class. So inside my learning plan template, I would add a new template. So this is for students who are doing the database cluster. And I can actually add even due dates and so forth. I could put in a description. I'm not gonna. And that actually builds a learning plan, but we have to add competencies to this learning plan. So I'm going to add, and we could actually pick them. So if I had a number of ICT level ones, I could say, I just want these ones. I have found you actually want to include the actual sub-level. So you can't, you would think that if you just include just the top level, it would include the sub ones by itself, but it doesn't, at least in my experience. And so this has added all these actual sub-competencies to the learning plan. So by having this learning plan, what I can actually do is every time a student enrolls in the course, I will give them a learning plan. And the learning plan literally says, this is what you have to learn in order to get a qualification. So in order for them to get a qualification, in this case, let's say a Diploma of Information Technology General, one of the things they have to do is the database cluster, and inside that database cluster is these competencies. Right. So coming back to my learning plan templates, I've got the database cluster. And what I actually want to do with this is I can actually even add this to a cohort to sync. So let's say I've got some new students coming in. I'm going to build them as a cohort, so that way I can add them to entire classes or courses very easily, or maybe even categories very easily. So I'm going to click on, and do I have any cohorts inside here? I believe I do. So I've got a cohort called the Diploma of IT General. I'm going to add this learning plan to that cohort. So now everybody in that cohort actually has that included as their learning plan. So if we actually go take a look at the users on this system, so Archie Andrews is a student inside this this cohort, and if we take a look here, his learning plan, I'm just trying to see it, yes, there's his learning plan there. You can actually see this is what he has to learn, the database cluster, and you can actually see he's not proficient in any of it yet. And so later on, as he goes through the course, he will become proficient in this in order to be to get the qualification. Now, it could be that, say, Archie comes and he's already studied some things, we can actually even go inside here and say, we want to request a review, and we can even include some evidence. So as I think I just don't have permissions to actually include because I'm not his teacher yet. But as a teacher, I could include some evidence that Archie has done this particular element of competency. So if I go back to my class, or to my course, I mean, I'll go back to my site home here, and I'm going to go into my course. And so inside here, as a teacher, when I first build my course, I want to include some competencies. So if you look down the side here, we have a section here called competencies. And this is going to show me the competencies that are built into the system. So we're going to add some competencies, and we're going to add these competencies that I just built. And so now these competencies are actually built into this course, so these are the things that we're going to measure students against. So if we go back to the actual course itself, now when we go into the actual activities, we have a section here called competencies, and we can say this particular activity is we're going to test people on performance criteria 1.1. And this was the important thing for us, because now we can actually take an assessment and we can say, we're testing the students in this assessment on these particular performance criteria. And we can actually build all of these in. So I only built in the one, but you can see that every time I could add multiple competencies into this actual activity. Upon completion, we're going to complete the competency. So when the student actually completes this activity, they're going to be competent in those two competencies. So I would also go inside there and I'd build in the course completion and so forth. I don't know why. Maybe I don't have course completion turned on in this course. Oh, that's bad of me. So I'm going to save and return to course. And so now my students will, if I add that cohort to this class, so we are going to enroll some users. We're going to enroll this cohort. And so now those users themselves, when they go in, they can actually have their competencies marked that way. All right. So, and I'm just going to come back and turn off my screen sharing for a moment. So yes, so yeah, I just noticed a question from Ellen. Yes, so that's RPL. You saw that when I was talking about we could actually have the student upload evidence, attach evidence. That would be their RPL. Now I have found actually in playing with these competencies that it's not perfect yet. I was looking for a magic silver bullet to solve all my problems with marking, and I found, yeah, there's a couple pitfalls a little bit in the workflow. I found that at times it's kind of confusing where to go and how to use them, and also the documentation, because this is a new feature and Moodle's a wiki. Some people haven't really written the documentation yet. So a couple people have pointed to me and said, hey, you're complaining about the documentation. Why don't you write some? And I'm like, I think I'll stop complaining at this point in time. But I think that this is really a good step in the right direction. I've struggled with Moodle before 3.1, trying to accommodate those competencies, and it's really good to see Moodle has put some real effort into this. So I'm really looking forward to more people using it, especially in like the TAFE and other sectors where we already have competency-based education, and see how these people actually apply it. And I think in, say, 6 months, 6 months to a year, a lot of people will be using these competency-based education and learning plans inside Moodle. So that was a brief look at how to do it, or at least how I would do it. I'm going to open the floor for questions. And this is where people can actually ask questions instead of staring at me. Hi, Trish. I should actually throw up a poll and ask if people are actually in what various sectors they're in, if they're already working or teaching in a competency-based education sector. So yeah, I'll say yes or no. You can say if you're already teaching inside a competency-based education system. So, sorry, you're starting to scroll on me now. We are a little off 3.1, but that's the thing. This is all inside our development Moodle, not in our production Moodle. So over Christmas this year, we are going to switch. Well, I say we, but I'm not really part of that anymore. The section I was at is going to be switching to Moodle 3.1. So I'm hoping that to hear back from my friends there, because they'll start using it in actual live courses, and we'll see how it goes. I know that some people, yeah, it's making the switch to a new version. Sometimes it takes a while. So I'm hoping now that, well, a lot of people I've been talking to just at various moots and stuff, they're looking at this Christmas to upgrade to 3.1 or even 3.2. So you've been waiting to use this with students at your college. I'm itching to put it in production and shake out the bugs inside production. In terms of setting up competencies, would it be easier to distribute the creation of competencies, or is it very top-down? So yeah, some people have talked to me about this in New Zealand, and they have a similar system to ASCWA there. And part of the problem is that it's going to be changing, at least with the ICT training package, it changes often. It has to, because it's IT. And part of the problem is that now you've got all these competencies, and if you've built them out like I did to the extreme, now it's like every year you have to go back and check those competencies and see if you have to update them or not. I'm thinking that in time we might actually see somebody build a standard set of competencies. I would hope so. I'd hope that somebody at ASCWA or somebody somewhere along the way is saying, hey, there's this new system. Why don't we actually formalize our competency structure and make it some kind of way that you can download and put into Moodle? I think that would be, if I was part of a regulating body, that's something I would make available. Right now, I think it's going to be teaching sections doing it ad hoc, and hopefully it won't take up too much time, but we all know as teachers that, yeah, just because you thought it would be a great idea, sometimes you never get to implement it. Even just flat files, yes. Yeah, there is no import-export. That would be a brilliant thing for them to add because of, like I said, I can see a regulating body determining what the competencies are and actually having that's what a regulating body does, determines the competencies. So to me, that would make sense. So there is no import-export, but I imagine somebody should get on the ball with that. Links to badges? No. That's another thing that would be really nice. I don't know. There's probably some debate about that. I like badges. I think it would be really cool if I actually went through a course and I actually could demonstrate it via a badge that I have obtained this unit. I think that we might have to play with it to actually create some kind of ad hoc using the course completion and the restrict access, the whole badge system itself. You might have to hack around and make it so that it won't be directly linked to the competencies, but it would be very nice if they actually included that. While I'm here, if you do go back to the course page as well, maybe I'll share my screen just for a second. We'll tempt fate. We'll share the screen twice. Just want to show you one more thing. Oh, that's fine. Oh, come on. We're going to open this. Yep. Meanwhile, I'll grab a drink. We are sharing my desktop. Perfect. Okay. While I was thinking, if you go back to the actual course 7, which is mine, the Using Competencies and Frameworks, I wanted to show you something completely unrelated, but maybe you'll find this a little bit of fun. And now would be a great time for my computer to die, or to the internet to die. Oh, I shouldn't have tempted fate, should I? Oh, okay, try that again. Actually, maybe it's, oh no, it's not open there. All right, so I don't know if this is actually going to load for me, but inside my actual course itself, I've included a lesson called the Kobayashi Maru. And if anybody's a Star Trek fan, have you heard of the Kobayashi Maru? Am I running off one of my Raspberry Pis? No, I'm not. This is the actual conference site. It might be because I'm in Big Blue Button right now. But if anybody's a Star Trek fan, you know the Kobayashi Maru. It's a no-win scenario, so please take a look at it. It's a little bit of a game that I've included there. If you're really clever, you'll figure out how to win the game. So here we are. So down here, here's what I was talking about. Do you want to be special? We'll see if anybody's actually collected a badge yet. Maybe it is running off one of my Raspberry Pis. It's a little bit slow. But if you want to, take a look at the Kobayashi Maru, and you'll have a prize for failing at it. But I'm very curious to see if anybody actually manages to win the Kobayashi Maru. Yeah, I think that's enough of that. I think it's a little bit dead. Okay, so I am going to end that demo. All right. Before okay, I just want to check here. So Gemma actually has a question here. If a competency is connected to an assessment, is the proof, the feedback on the assessment, automatically linked, or do you still need to ask for a proof review as a teacher? That's a great question, and it's one that it's a little bit, that's where it gets a little bit confusing in actually the use, and that's why I want to see some people use it in the wild. From my understanding, if you attach a competency to an assessment, as I did, you still have to rank the competency. But so you still have to say, is the student competent? Have they achieved this competency or not? But the competency is linked to that assessment. So that way you have that link of, here's the evidence that shows that they're competent in this particular performance criteria. I was of the belief that it would automatically just grant competencies, and you could see that you could play with it to say either automatically or automatically turn it in for review or so forth. It's a little bit undone in that area, but it does kind of link those competencies to the actual evidence. It's still very early for me. Yes, that's my understanding, Gemma. But I think that there's various hacks that people are trying to actually get it to automatically mark as competent. The problem is the workflow does break down a little bit there, at least in my scenario that I actually put forward. in that if a student uploaded the assessment the fictitious assessment where they had to write this SQL code and upload it as a text file, there might be some elements that they do correctly and some elements that they don't do correctly. So to make it automatically turn them all as competent is not a desirable action. So I think that I think some people are looking at ways that you can do that. But as I understand it, you do actually have to go through and mark them as competent as well. How would this student data export to a third-party system? To something like a vet tracker. So something like EBS for TAFE. I don't have an answer on that. That is a great question. Well, obviously, I mean, the evidence itself would remain inside Moodle, and you could probably keep that. You must be able to export it in some way. I'm just wondering how you could link that to an external system. I don't have an answer. That's a great question, Ellen, and yeah, one that I'm going to have to research for the next time I give this presentation. You stumped me. Click on the special. You can go get a special badge. Any other questions? Oh. You have it, you hope. I set it up so that only the first 6 people who click on the I want to be special get a special badge. And I was nice. I didn't click. I wasn't one of the 6, so I might not have it. All right. I think that might be it. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for this introductory look at competencies and learning frameworks, and thank you very much for attending.
And this is Vinny. Hi, and thank you very much, Scott, for presenting again for us today at the iMoot.
No problem.
Okay, folks, enjoy the rest of the iMoot. The next session starting in around about 15 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.